live on April the 26th, 2020. Um, like I said, Jim Howard with Trinity Security Allies. We're having some more technical, a little bit of tech glitch here, but we're online. Um, Trinity Security Allies, our ministry is your church's safety. You can find out more about us at trinitysecurityallies.com. We come out every Sunday and do a 30-minute church safety network page. We're on our Trinity Security page tonight. We are a nonprofit. All those who are listening, we are looking for financial partners to help us get the word out. Over 90% of the churches around the country are 500 or less. 60% are under 100. We want to reach out to those 90%. We want to make it to where they can have our training without having to worry about a financial burden. So we're looking for people to help us and join the Centurion Club. We have resources on our webpage, free resources on our webpage. We have developing a safety team, putting together a safety team. We have our April blog out there, and we also have Zoom online training. And what we're looking at doing is we started because we got a letter from the Department of Homeland Security on April the 8th, which talked about when we open up our churches again, that there is a good possibility of an attack. There's nothing that they say that they have information on an attack, but because of the hate speech that's out there and hate speech that's been going around the internet, they are worried about the different things that might happen. So these are just things that we want to get out online, and we want to do online training until the end of May. You can go to YouTube and you can see some of our online training that we've already done. For example, on 4/23/2020, we did a use of force in the church with James Simmons, Attorney James Simmons. It was a fantastic meeting. We did it also live. We put it together and was able to do a Zoom plus a Facebook Live at the same time. And it was just really exciting. That is now out on YouTube. It is in SD instead of HD because there was some sort of, when we converted it, it put it in SD, but you can get the gist of what we're talking about. And James is a liability attorney, and he kind of walked through things that you need to be doing to protecting your church. This Thursday, we're going to be talking about putting together a safety plan. Now, this is one of our ebooks, and you can go out and pick it up. We're going to be starting at 8 o'clock, and we're going to go for about 30 minutes talking about putting together a safety plan, and then we're going to kind of end it up to where we do questions and answers. We do a Q&A. On May the 7th, we're going to do developing a safety team. And then on May 14th, we're going to do carrying weapons in a church. May 21, we'll be doing Sunday morning, what to look for. And there's going to be a lot more out there that we're going to be doing. So let's get started. Let us know where you're from. What we want to talk about today, and this is something that I have not been comfortable about it for a while, but let me just say it this way. It is something that when we first started doing our training, I didn't talk about this until the very end of our class. Like if we were doing a class on setting up a safety team, I would wait until the very end of the class to talk about it. But the more that people heard it, the more that people talked to us about really putting it together and putting it out here so that other people could hear about it. So because of that, we've changed it, and now we put it at the front of our presentation. Now, the reason why we do that is because we want to make sure that people understand where we came from and what we're about. And so I'm going to go through my testimony. This will just give you a little bit about who I am, where we came from, and just how we got to where we're at today. And we feel like this is very important. There's a lot of people that do not know who we are, have never heard of us. When we start to talk about kind of how we got here, they find it interesting because I've been able to look at it at different ways as far as setting up safety teams. So to begin with, we have to go all the way back. This is just how God has a plan for everything. And I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. I was the oldest of 4 boys. At a very young age, we moved to a farm where we had 108 acres, and my dad, I became kind of a kid that lived on a farm, cows, We had our own crops, different things like that, and we raised our own crops. And so it was one of these things where my dad, to me at that time, seemed to be just strict. In today's world, he would have been abusive, and he was abusive. I mean, that's just all there is to it. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it at all. My dad was abusive. I mean, he would hit us at just if we looked at him the wrong way. I remember one time going to school and changing for football, and the coach came out and asked me if I wanted to talk about. He pointed at my legs, and I looked down. I had whelps on my legs, and I said I did something wrong, and my dad hit me. And of course, he was like curious. Hit you with what? And I said a water hose. We had a horse that stepped on one of our water hose, broke it, a garden hose, and my dad beat me with it because he blamed me for leaving it out there. Um, it was one of these type of things where we knew that we were kind of in a commodity, that he had boys so that he could help us help him on the farm. And that's kind of the way that we looked at it. And as long as we stayed right where we were supposed to stay, did not give him a hard time or anything like that, my dad let us do other things. Like I was in the band. I was in, I was able to go to movies, different things like that. And he didn't ever stop me from doing those things as long I got to play football. Now, you understand, I was growing up in a little small town called Glenrose, and Glenrose had 1,540 people. And so in high school, there was only 35 in my class. So if you could chew gum and walk at the same time, you played every sport that there was out there. So this was the type of lifestyle that I grew up. And when I looked at friends of mine who would come to school sometimes with black eyes or different things like that, and you would go, hey, what happened to you? And they would say, I smarted off to my dad last night and he hit me. That was kind of the norm. And my dad was a really hard worker. And I looked up to him because of his work ethics. But he wasn't a very loving dad. He never took us and did things together. We were kind of, like I said, we were a commodity. He needed us to help him with the farm. We went to a church. My mom was in the choir. My dad taught Sunday school. I met a deacon in the church who was also in charge of or ran ministry, the Royal Ambassadors, which was the Boy Scouts for the Baptist Church. And he became my Christian mentor. He taught me about Christ. I was saved at an early age, and he saw a lot in me and just helped me with my Christian walk. Now, this deacon was also married with 8 kids and had family of his own that were in our ages, and we went to school together and we socialized together, and we were very, they're our really good friends. And so this relationship went on for about 8 years. Well, in 1970, my dad started to get physically violent against my mom to the point to where he had beat her up a couple of times. And so one Sunday night when he attacked her, I went and got in between them, and she broke away. He went away. She grabbed me and said, let's go to church. And so we jumped in a car and we went to church. So after the church service, driving home, she stopped about a mile away from the house and said, I'm not coming back. So you need to go tell your dad that, this is it. So I get out of the car. I walk to the house, of course, expecting to get killed because my mom had left. My dad just said, go do your chores, get ready for bed. Let's not talk about it. A couple of weeks later, my mom showed up again, and she grabbed the 4 boys and took us over to live with the deacon and his family. He had 7 kids at that time. One of his eighth was married and out of the house, but his wife, his 7 kids, and all of us were in the house together. Now, during this time, we're still going to church. And in my mind, he had been talking to both my parents. He was a friend of my dad, his friend of my mom, both, all together. I was expecting him to talk to her, my mom and my dad, and really fix this because I loved where I was living. I was almost 16 years old. My dad had told me he was going to let me drive one of the trucks on the farm. And I knew why, so that I could run errands for him, but still I'd be able to drive back and forth to school and to different things like that. And so, I was loving this lifestyle that I was in. So I was praying and hoping that this deacon would be able to consult my parents and get them back together again. So one Sunday night in September of 1970, we went to church. Went to the Sunday night service, and my dad sat in the middle of church. My mom and I sat over on one side, and my brother plus one of the deacon's son sat over on like the right side. Nobody around my dad at all. Just he was completely isolated on his own. And so when the church service was over with, my mom said, "I'm not feeling well," and she wanted to go. So we got up and left, and we got back over to the deacon's house, and we were waiting for everybody to get there when we got the phone call that my dad had stepped outside and shot and killed the deacon in the parking lot of the church. So immediately my life changed because my mom didn't have any folks there. My dad grew up in that area, so he knew a lot of the people there. My mom was an outsider. And so the first thing that she did was she packed us all up and we moved to Pensacola, Florida, where her family lived. When we got to Pensacola, Florida, and I went to the high school there, I went from, like I said, a 35 class to about a 350 class. And I was a very small fish in a large pond, and I really lost my identity. Because on the farm and at the high school, you have to understand, I was kind of a big man on campus because of how the size of it and how small it was. My love was music and football, but when I got to the bigger school, I realized I could not compete with these guys because I'd never been trained, and I wasn't even in the running for it. The other thing that happened during that time frame was that I got really angry at God. I could not understand why God let this happen, because here was my Christian mentor that I was studying, and he was teaching me about Christ, and then here was my dad who was my mentor on his work ethics and how he did so many things. And yet God had taken both of them away from me. And really, during this time frame, my mom and I started to fight because I was the oldest. I reminded her of my dad. And so, we were constantly at odds with each other. I wanted to go back to Texas, and she just wanted to look forward and not think about the past. And I fought her on that altogether. So after graduating high school, my mom remarried. Now I got into the band, and I kind of became a big man on campus again because I played French horn. I took first chair. I was in competitions all the time. It really kind of helped me. Music helped me. It kept me off the streets because you had to keep good grades, or if you didn't, you would be in terrible trouble. So I was really excited about being in music because, like I said, it gave me something to focus on, and it made me popular. But the thing of it is, I was still mad at God because of what had happened. And my relationships were they were all over the place. I couldn't hold a relationship really just because of my anger and a lot of the issues that I had. So when my mom remarried right before I graduated from high school, and she married a guy that was in the Navy, and they ended up he got transferred to Norfolk, Virginia, and I stayed in Pensacola. Well, I was working at a factory. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I'd probably go back to one of the junior colleges and take my music and go with it. And so right before that happened, I got robbed. I was at a convenience store, and I was leaving, and a guy came up and got in my car. And I was kind of like, looked at him. I said, "Get out of my car." And he says, "I'm going to kill you if you don't do what I tell you to do. I have a gun." And I just was like, "Okay, where do you want to go?" So we drove around for over an hour and a half. He took me to a vacant field. I thought he was going to kill me. He didn't. He made me drive him to a abandoned strip mall. He got out of the car, said, "If I ever see you again, I'll kill you." Well, of course, I went across the street and contacted local law enforcement there in Escambia County. They came out and took the report and kind of looked at me like, "Oh, yeah, why don't you tell us the truth?" They kept asking this because you have to understand, this is 70s. I had long hair. I was driving a 70 Barracuda. They're thinking it's a drug deal gone bad. And so a couple of days later, I saw the guy who had robbed me in my neighborhood. And so I went and called the police. We went up to where he was, and I saw that it was a bus stop. They said the deputy got on the radio and said, "Stop all the buses coming out of this area." Next thing you know, we get a call from the dispatch that says, "Hey, we've got a bus stop up here. Bring your witness up." And he drove, of course, like you would see on live TV. I mean, just flying up there sideways, flying over bridges, all these things like this. I'm holding on for dear life. We pull up and stop where they had this bus, and he gets out and he says, "Come on, let's go." And I was like, "Excuse me, can't you just have him step out of the bus and let me identify him?" He says, No. You got to go with me. We got to get on the bus. You got to point him out. And I said, do you remember the part where he said he would kill me if he saw me again? And he was like, don't worry about it. I'll go in front. There's going to be another deputy behind you, but we're going to go on the bus here and let's identify him. So we got on the bus. Don't know how I got on the bus. Don't know how I got up that first step. Cotton mouth, just dry, knees shaking, heart just pounding. We get on the bus. I pointed him out. They grabbed a hold of him. I came off the bus. I was sitting in the police car. The deputy comes over and he says, are you doing okay? And I just sat there and I said, because of the adrenaline rush and everything else, I went, I have got to do this. And so he said, how old are you? And I said, 18. He said, well, we only take 21-year-olds. So what you might want to do is to go into the military. So the very next week, I went and signed up for the Air Force and went into security police, thinking that this was going to be police work. But what it ended up being was the ground infantry of the Air Force. And so I was a little bit, I didn't really care for it. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do police work, not walk around phantoms all night long and count rivets. So when I was in the reserve, and so when I got out doing my active duty, I'd contacted my mom up in Norfolk, and she said, why don't you come up? And she said, let me help you get back into school, and let's get you back on track. And she wanted me to be a minister of music. Of course, that was the funny part about it. And of course, I just wanted to be a rock star during that time frame. And so I went up to Norfolk, went back to school, studying music, and I realized that it was a job. Music had been an escape for me, but now it became a job. If I was going to be able to be anybody in this, I had to learn how to study music theory. I had to do all the different things that they wanted us to do, and it became a job. And I really wasn't happy with it. In fact, I was very disappointed in it. So one night when I was walking around the college campus, I came across an Old Dominion sergeant. And I had my Air Force jacket on, and he recognized it and said, oh, you were at Eglin Air Force Base. I said, yes, sir, I was. And he said, did you know that the city of Norfolk is hiring right now? That's all I needed to hear. The very next day, I went and signed up for the police department. I had this incredible career. I had this unbelievable career. 26 years with the Norfolk Police Department. It was unbelievable. But the problem I had a terrible time with relationships. And I had been to 2 marriages when I met Wendy. Why Wendy decided to marry me, I'll have no idea, because I'd already been through 2 marriages. But she ended up marrying me. When I left the police department, I went to Washington, D.C., where I did computer consulting. I had a computer background, and also did executive protection work for the World Bank. And once again, I felt like I was on top of the world, except for the fact that I could not hold on to Wendy. I knew that I was going to lose her. Wendy had gotten pregnant. We had our first child, Jessica, and the first time I held Jessica, I was like, I completely understood unconditional love. People would talk to me about God, and they would talk to me about Christ and how God was our loving Father and we need to trust him. And I would look at them and say, I don't want to hear this, because, the only father I knew was my earthly father, who had been, this total jerk, and, was in the penitentiary and different things like this. And so I didn't even want to hear that about God. And I fought it and fought it and fought it. Well, of course, because of me being my own God, what I considered, I failed again. And I almost lost Jessica and Wendy. And so I had an opportunity to come down here to Florida for a job. And I came down here and took it. It was with a computer company, public safety software. And I came down and took it. And the very first day that we were here, a guy walked across the street and said, hey, I go to this church. Would you like to join me? And I thought to myself, I've got to do something, because I don't want to lose Wendy and Jessica. I got to do something right now. So maybe I need to look into this Christianity thing again. So I went back to church and gave my life to Christ, but I didn't understand grace. I thought because of the bad life that I had lived, that I had to work off my sins. And so for the first 3 years while I was at church, I worked in what we called a crow's nest. It was where the audio visual was during that time frame. We had a PowerPoint, and we had 2 cameras that we would change. When the pastor would stand up, we'd flip on one. When the pastor would sit down, we'd flip on the other. So I stayed up there for 3 years, and then they came in and said, hey, we're going to change things up. We have this new board that you got to work on. You got to have like a college degree, because it was as wide as my desk sitting right here. And I was like, no, I'm getting too old for this. I don't want to do this. This doesn't look like fun. And so I started looking for ways I could serve. Now, the first thing that I did, Wendy and Jessica were working in the children's ministry, and Jessica says, "Hey, why don't you come and work with us?" And so I was like, "Sure, why not?" I mean, my little buddy's there. I can work with Wendy, and stuff like this. But the first weekend that I realized that I could not tase little Johnny for sitting down, I realized that this was not the place for me. And then when I got asked to leave because it just wasn't good for me. It really was not. Then they asked me if I wanted to be a greeter. And of course I said, why not? And so I would stand there and I'd smile at people and I'd say, "Hey, welcome to our church." And when they wouldn't say, well, thank you, it's good to be here, or smile or anything like that, I'd grab a hold of them and ask them what their problem was. So that wasn't working out either. But during this time frame, we had purchased property in another county and we were going to build a new church. And so they were having a building fund drive and a lot of money was being raised on the weekends. And so they came to me and they said, "Hey, Jim, how about setting up a kind of a security team?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is perfect." I was around in 1999 when Columbine happened. We were one of the first police departments that did active shooter training. I mean, we actually did in the city of Norfolk. I worked in that. I trained in that. And then when I went to the World Bank, it was 2001, 9/11 happened. So I learned all about soft targets. And of course, churches are soft targets. And they just looked at me and said, "We just want you to watch the money go from point A to point B." I just said, "Listen, I'm a good servant. I will do that. I will be more than happy to do that." So we were working and we had a lady that was coming in with her children, and she was going into the children's ministry and dropping off her kids. And then she would head over to the worship center. Her ex-husband, who had supervised visitation. Now, what that means in the state of Florida is you don't get to see your kids unless you're at a state facility. And so he was circumventing his supervised visitation because he would wait till his ex-wife would get into the worship center, and then he would go in and take the kids and walk around the campus. He never left the campus, but he'd walk around the campus. And of course, when the mother would come to get the kids and they would say, "Hey, he's hanging out. Charles came in and got him," she would lose her mind. She was scared to death of him. She was afraid he was going to hurt the kid. So she came to the church and she told the church that and that she had this court order that he had supervised visitation. The church came to me and said, "What should we do on this?" And I said, "We need to follow the court order, because if there is one, we need to pull him aside and say, 'Hey, you can't get your kids here.'" Well, before we had a chance for her to find the court order and bring it in, we caught him threatening his ex-father-in-law. He was going to beat him up, and he was a big guy. His ex-father-in-law wasn't that big of a guy. So we stepped in immediately and escorted Charles off the campus. The very next week, a Pasco County detective showed up on the church property and said, "Hey, we're looking for this guy, Charles Deere. Do y'all know him?" And we said, "Yes, we do." And he said, "Well, he's a suspect in a murder case because he killed his landlord." And we said, "What day was that?" It was the Sunday that we had the run-in with him. So apparently he went back to the place that he was staying and killed his ex-landlord. So right then the church was like, "Okay, we've got to look at this different." So they came to me and they asked me, "Put together a plan. Let's work on it." So I put together a plan. I went out and did my research, put together a plan, and we started a safety team. Well, the next thing you know, I started getting calls from other churches to go and train their church to put together a safety team. And I was working as a detective out in the town of Bel Air. I had an incredible job out there. It was a fantastic job. I had incredible cases, but I went to North Carolina. I was kind of like working these two separate things, and I wasn't seeing the family. I wasn't getting to hang out with the family and things like that because of everything that was going on. So I went to North Carolina to do some training up there for a friend of mine. And when I got back home, Wendy sat me down and said, "Which one are you going to pick? Either you're a full-time detective or your full-time church ministry. Which one is it?" And there wasn't a choice. I felt that God had led me here. And so we took that leap of faith and we jumped it. And that's how we got started. In 2015, we started Trinity Security Allies, a nonprofit, and God has been good to us since. We make it, we get by. We'd love to have more contributors to it so that we could do more work, but we do get by because God takes care of us. But when I sit back and I look at it, when I sit back and I look at it, God had this plan from day one. I just didn't see it. There were multiple times when I was with the Norfolk Police Department that he protected me. There were things that I did when I was not walking with him that he protected me. He saved my life on multiple occasions on things that just intoxicated while driving and different things like that, accidents that I had. But he was always there to protect me, even in my career when I worked with people that I shouldn't be working with. As soon as it started to go south, he would transfer me. I would get transferred. It was all part of his plan. When we went to DC and we found this job down here, just because it was all a part of his plan, this all along has been a part of his plan. So we started doing this, and we started going around the counties because we believe in networking. That's one of the strong things that we do here is we do networking with other counties so that we can share information that's happening from county to county. And plus, it gives us an opportunity to talk about things that we've noticed that have happened in the churches that we feel are important, and it's kind of a training session. So once that started, the next thing you know, we started getting more calls. And the next thing you know, I was going out of state more to do this training. So we've been all over the United States. It's all been God's plan. It was just something that I could have easily stayed where I was. I probably would have been, maybe not the chief of police, but I probably would have been second in command if I'd have stayed. But it wasn't God's plan. It wasn't God's plan. His plan was to have us doing this ministry. And like I said, we've never looked back. So when we start to talk about Trinity Security Allies, you have to understand being a victim of a domestic violence where a death, a shooting at a church, an active shooter, being robbed, understanding that, being a victim of a really serious crime, and then being in law enforcement, God's been training me for this all along. He's been putting all this together from day one. And of course, now I have a ministry that when we train, we talk about our main focus is the expansion of the kingdom of God. But while we're doing that and helping those that are doing that, we protect the flock. So when you hear about us and you kind of want to know something about us, this is where we came from. This is how we got started. This wasn't one of these type of things that one day we just looked at it and said, hey, it sure would be cool to be to do a ministry. No, God's been leading us this way all the way through. And I've never doubted him when we got started. Wendy and I both trust him completely, even in this time where it's been a little tight because of the church situation of them not meeting. But we just trust in him. So understand when I come to you and talk to you, this isn't just a passion. This is my ministry. This is my love. This is my life. This is where God has led me. So come out this Thursday and hear about putting together a safety plan, what we worked on, and there's a free ebook. You can go download it, and we'll be going over that. We'll probably be adding some more to it. And then you can ask us questions and let us know if you have anything that you'd really like to get from us. You have to go out and register. It's going to be on our Facebook page and also on our webpage, which is Trinity Security Allies. So just want you to know that if you need anything in protecting your flock, and I know that right now we're not doing much at all, but we got to start getting ready for when we do. Because everybody that I talk to, every church that I've been associated with, everyone that I get together with, they tell me that people have been calling, wanting to know when we're going to start again. There's going to be a revival for a while. There really is. And we have to be prepared for that. We have to be ready for that. And we have to be ready to make sure that everybody is safe that comes into that church or your church, my church, whichever church they come into, because we want to make sure that we do the right things. So, of course, we don't spread the virus anymore, but we also get those who are searching for answers that maybe have lost jobs, lost family members, just have been scared to death because of what has been said. We want to make sure that we get them in there and we tell them what's going on and we tell them about the love of Christ. But we also watch out for those that are hurting, that have stressors that may cause them to want to come and hurt your church. This is what we do. So any questions, anytime you need something, please don't hesitate to call us. Don't hesitate to email us. We're always there for you. I thank you so much for the 30 minutes that you've given me. This will be posted later. God bless you. Be safe and come back next week. See you on Thursday night. Have a great night.